It's one of the most incomprehensible acts a person can commit, and yet it's happening with increasing frequency. What drives a person to commit the ultimate act of betrayal and violence by murdering their own loved ones? What drives the warped mind of the so-called family annihilator? John List. John List is a notorious American murderer who killed his entire family in 1971. An example of the anomic subcategory of family annihilators, List was facing financial difficulties and decided his family was better off dead than living with the shame of bankruptcy. He killed them one by one throughout the day. After watching the children leave for school in the morning, List shot and killed his wife, Helen, in the kitchen while she drank a cup of coffee. He then went up to the third floor where his mother was lying in bed and murdered her. Next was his 16-year-old daughter, Patricia, when she returned home from school, and his youngest son, 13-year-old Frederick, shortly thereafter. List then reportedly attended the soccer game of his only still living son, John, and cheered for the team before driving him home and killing him. List's horrific crimes were not discovered until almost a month later when the bodies of his family were found inside his abandoned home. A nationwide manhunt was launched to find List, who had assumed a new identity and was living in Virginia under an assumed name. It wasn't until 1989, almost 20 years later, that List was finally apprehended and brought to trial. He was found guilty of 5 counts of murder and was sentenced to life in prison. List died in prison from pneumonia-related complications in 2008 at the age of 82. Chris Benoit. Chris Benoit was a Canadian professional wrestler who was active in the wrestling industry for over 2 decades, starting in 1985. He was known for his flamboyant, high-flying style and was a popular figure in the sports entertainment world. However, on June 22, 2007, Chris Benoit committed an unimaginable crime that sent shockwaves throughout the industry and the world. Benoit murdered his wife, Nancy Benoit, and their 7-year-old son, Daniel, before hanging himself in their home in Fayetteville, Georgia. The murders and subsequent suicide were not discovered until 3 days later, when Benoit failed to show up for a wrestling event and officials were sent to check on him. The investigation revealed that Benoit had killed his wife and son over the course of a 2-day period before taking his own life. It was later determined that Benoit was suffering from severe brain damage due to his career as a wrestler, and it is believed that this, combined with other personal and financial problems, may have contributed to his actions. The Chris Benoit case sparked a conversation about the long-term effects of head trauma in professional sports. It was a tragic and senseless crime that devastated the wrestling community and the families of the victims. Christian Longo. Christian Longo gained infamy in the early 2000s for committing a shocking crime. In December 2001, Longo murdered his wife, Mary Jane Longo, and their 3 young children, Zachary, Sadie, and Madison, in Waldport, Oregon. The bodies of the victims were found floating in the Yaquina Bay, and it was later determined that they had been strangled to death. Longo fled the country after the murders and was eventually captured in Cancun, Mexico, in January 2002. He was brought back to the United States and subsequently charged with 4 counts of aggravated murder. During his trial, Longo claimed that his wife had killed the children and that he had killed her in self-defense. However, this defense was not successful, and Longo was found guilty on all counts. In 2003, he was sentenced to death by lethal injection. However, on December 13, 2022, Governor Kate Brown commuted the sentences of all of Oregon's death row inmates to life without the possibility of parole, so Longo was spared execution. He will now spend the remainder of his natural life behind bars. Christopher Foster. Christopher Foster was a millionaire businessman from Shropshire, England, whose life revolved around guns. He loved shooting and collecting them. He gained eternal notoriety in 2008 when he used his collection to shoot his wife, Gillian, and his 15-year-old daughter, Kirsty, at their home in Maesbrook, Shropshire. He even killed the family's horses and dogs before setting the mansion on fire and crawling into bed with his wife's body where he would quickly die of smoke inhalation. The following day, the bodies of Foster, his wife, and his daughter were found in the charred remains of what was soon called Murder Mansion. An investigation revealed that Foster was facing financial difficulties and was in danger of losing his mansion and his business. It is believed that this stress may have contributed to his decision to commit the murders and take his own life. Friends later described Foster as like Jekyll and Hyde, a man who fell into dark moods and delusional paranoid thinking. Chris Watts. Chris Watts gained infamy in 2018 after he murdered his pregnant wife, Shanann Rzucek, and their two young daughters, Bella and Celeste. The case garnered widespread media attention and left the public stunned by the horrific nature of the crime. Chris met Shanann in 2010 and they married in 2012. The couple had two daughters together, Bella and Celeste, and appeared to be living a happy and normal life in Frederick, Colorado. However, behind closed doors, Chris Watts was leading a double life. He was having an affair with a co-worker and had become emotionally distant from his wife and children. In August 2018, Chris Watts made the decision to kill his family in order to start a new life with his mistress. According to uncontested court statements, on August 13, 2018, Watts strangled his wife to death while she was 15 weeks pregnant. He then smothered his two daughters, who were just 3 and 4 years old, to death. After committing the murders, Chris Watts disposed of his wife's body in a shallow grave on an oilwork site and dumped his daughters' bodies in oil tanks. Chris Watts initially claimed that his wife and children had gone missing and pleaded for their safe return. However, he eventually confessed to the murders and was arrested and charged with 9 counts, including first-degree murder and unlawful termination of a pregnancy. In November 2018, Chris Watts pleaded guilty to all charges and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.